evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Wisniewski, and the name of my presentation is John Steinbeck, Creating a Socially Conscious Experience in 20th Century American Literature. In researching this project and researching in general, most of us rely on secondary sources in the form of books, journals, articles, videos, and interviews. These can all be viewed as rather passive forms of research, as they don't require us to form our own opinions on firsthand experiences. John Steinbeck, however, operated to the contrary. He based most of his research and opinions on active research. This could be based on places he had lived or visited, people he had known, or situations he had experienced or seen others experience. He did not just want to gain knowledge for the sake of knowing something, he truly wanted to understand it. It is through his writings that we can find a true and honest glimpse into things such as war and the plight of migrant workers, and also challenge our beliefs that form our moral standard for life. Okay, the first thing that I would like to do is just kind of go over a brief timeline of his life. John Steinbeck was born on February 27th, 1902 in Salinas, California, which was a small farming town. His parents were Olive Hamilton and John Ernest Steinbeck. He was the only boy out of 4 children and had 2 older sisters and 1 younger one. His childhood was overall very happy, and his family lived comfortably for the most part while he grew up. At age 9, he was given a copy of Thomas Mallory's La Morte d'Arthur by his Aunt Molly, and he was memorized by this book, and him and his younger sister Mary used to actually act out scenes in the book. At a later point, this book provided inspiration for research and a translation of it that he was working on until the time of his death. During his adolescence, he was known to have locked himself in his attic room for hours at a time, writing short stories and articles. He would submit these pieces to magazines and use fictitious names and not provide return addresses for fear that he might get rejected. He also wrote for a school newspaper and knew by age 14 that he wanted to be a writer. In 1919, he enrolled at Stanford University, attended there for 6 years. Fortunately, he didn't actually graduate there. While he was primarily there, he took writing and literature classes, but also found additional interest in biology, which would later provide inspiration for several of his later works. Also provided an outlet for him to develop kind of a unique relationship with another man that influenced a lot of his later writing. After leaving Stanford in 1925, he moved to New York for a brief period of time, took on part-time journalism assignments and manual labor jobs. This time was very scary to him, showed him how cruel and lonely poverty could be, and this fueled his desire to return to California. After returning to California, he settled in Lake Tahoe. He finished his first novel, Cup of Gold, in 1929. Unfortunately, this was not well received, either critically or commercially. However, this would not stop him from pursuing his dream. Okay, and this is just timeline continued. In 1930, he moved to Los Angeles and he married Carol Henning. He had met Miss Henning while working at the fish hatchery in Lake Tahoe. She supported his dreams of writing and would often work several jobs while he stayed at home to write. During this time, the Steinbecks really were not in a very good financial situation. They actually lived in one of John's parents' homes. His first commercial and critical success was on a book named Tortilla Flat in 1935. This success fueled further success in the next 3 novels he wrote, which all pertained to labor issues and included In Dubois Battle, Of Mice and Men, and The Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath created quite a controversy in many ways, but in one county it actually was banned from its schools due to content and nature of the subject matter. This ban lasted until 1941. 1940, Steinbeck became ill and was starting to watch his marriage unravel and decided to take a break from the public eye and the scrutiny of his work. He set sail with both his wife and his friend Ed Ricketts on the Gulf of California. It was during this time that he found the inspiration for his novel, The Sea of Cortez. Ed Ricketts is actually the man that I had referenced prior screen. where he had developed a unique friendship. Ed was actually a biologist that specialized in collecting biological samples and selling them. So very unique relationship. A lot of works, a lot of collaboration between the two. From 1943 to 1945, his focus was on World War II. Provided a lot of inspiration for several novels. During this time, he acted as a war correspondent and ended up divorcing Carol and marrying Gwen Conger. From 1945 to 1951, several of his novels were turned into screenplays or adapted for the theater. Some of his works during this time included The Pearl and Cannery Row. He also experienced two tragedies, the first in the form of losing his friend Ed Ricketts in a car accident involving a train. He was notified of the accident, was on his way to see his friend, but unfortunately he did not make it on time before Mr. Ricketts passed away. After returning from this trip, he was then notified by his wife Gwen that she was filing for divorce. This was the beginning of a downward spiral for him that led to a period of depression and great reflection, and actually a lot of creativity on his part. The 1950s and 60s brought a third and final marriage for Mr. Steinbeck. It was also filled with several awards, including the Nobel Prize for Literature and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It was during this time that he finished a work called East of Eden, which he viewed as the highlight and most important work of his career. He also spent time overseas in England doing research for his translation of Le Morte d'Arthur. Upon returning, he was kind of upset to see the decline in moral standards in the United States and wrote the novel The Winter of Our Discontent. His last book was America and Americans, which was a book of essays about American character. He died from heart issues on December 20th, 1968. Okay, next I'd like to go over his contributions, but before I do that, you can see a quote off to the side. Hopefully you guys can read it. The quote says, "And this I believe, that the free exploring mind of the individual human is the most valuable thing in the world. And this I would fight for, the freedom of the mind to take any direction it wishes, undirected. And this I must fight against, any idea, religion, or government which limits or destroys the individual. This is what I am and what I am about." This is actually a comment from East of Eden. Or actually, I'm sorry, a quote, not a comment, a quote. Okay, his individual works included 16 novels, a collection of short stories, 4 screenplays, 3 travel narratives, a translation, and 2 published journals. When he first began writing, most of his attention was focused on group behavior in relation to environment. He evolved over time. His focus changed to reflect one's moral obligation and responsibilities to oneself, their community, and society. His writings made people face the harsh realities that life was not perfect for everyone, and in fact, many people struggled on a day-to-day basis and were in fact not being treated fairly. Grapes of Wrath, despite its controversy that surrounded it, was a driving force in creating legislation to help migrant workers. His belief that characters are a direct reflection of their environment was a contrary concept to the idea that everyone had equal opportunity to create their version of the perfect American dream. This really was kind of a negative outlook, not something that America wanted portrayed. They wanted, people to believe that everyone had the same opportunities when they come over here to make the best life for themselves. So a lot of what he brought to light was not a very positive thing. It was more the negative side of what can happen to somebody and trying to pursue those dreams. Okay, he did write 2 novels during wartime with the intent to also encourage patriotism. Okay, various influences. He had a lot of historical and social influences in his life that contributed to his writing and his style. One of those things was the Great Depression. That had a very big impact on a lot of people. He was born in 1902. The Depression happened toward the late 20s, so he was in his mid to late 20s when it occurred, and was actually starting to write at that point. But what he actually observed and what everybody observed and dealt with was a situation of people having a lot of things and then all of a sudden maybe not having a lot of things, and going to the opposite end of the spectrum and going from rich to poor. But you also saw a situation of people that were already at that end of the spectrum of being poor and then being really impacted to the point of really suffering. So that was a great influence on him, and I'm sure a lot of other authors during that time. Another thing that impacted him in a very interesting way was communism. He was not a communist. However, a lot of his works were perceived communist in nature, especially the works that pertain to labor. So again, we were kind of pointing in the direction of Grapes of Wrath. That is a labor-related novel. That particular novel invoked a lot of people to start wondering, if he was communist. And so it actually put him in a situation where he was investigated for it. They did not find he was communist, but he was in fact investigated for it. And I'm sure that put a lot of stress on him, and probably contributed to a lot of, why he maybe was feeling ill during certain parts of his life and maybe things weren't going so well for him. Of course, immigrant farm workers were big influence on him. He actually lived in some of the farm work villages and worked with people there. And so he saw firsthand what these people were going through, their struggles, how they were treated. So that was a very big impact for him. He also did work in some other menial labor-related type jobs. And so he saw a lot of how low blue-collar people were treated. World War II and Vietnam War provided a lot of influence for him. He wrote several novels pertaining to war themes. Vietnam War, he actually was a correspondent. Both of his sons were actually serving during that war. So that provided a lot of inspiration for him. World War II, he was also a correspondent. Again, he was able to see things firsthand. He wasn't just taking accounts from other people or researching things. He was there and he was involved. Nature and environment, through his relationship with Ed Ricketts and his interest in biology, found a lot of inspiration. He also found inspiration in places that he had lived as a child or growing up. Found a lot of interesting things about where he had been, and a lot of times used those places as the basis of a setting for his stories. Okay, additional influences, people. One of the first people that influenced him was his mother. She actually was a retired school teacher. She had a love of literature herself, and their house was actually filled with books, and so her love of literature kind of transferred to him. Of course, the people he met while working, big influence on what he wrote about and his feelings about society and the way people were treated. Ed Ricketts, again, another influence. That was his biologist friend. A lot of his works would revolve around their adventures that they had together. And then just society as a whole. Just things going on like war, labor issues, people's behavior in general would influence things that he would write and things that he would want to express to people. Okay, controversy. I've kind of talked a little bit about Grapes of Wrath, but this book did create quite a bit of a stir for a number of different reasons. We've already kind of talked about the situation with communism and how it led him to be viewed as a possible communist. There were some other things that kind of really set the book off where people were not very happy with it. One of the things that really created a problem pertained to where the book was set. You've got two different settings. You've got Oklahoma and California. Oklahoma was portrayed as a poverty-stricken area. So, anyone could look at that and say, oh, you're portraying our area as, not an area to come live and work and raise your family. California came across with the growers looking very greedy and selfish. Again, that doesn't look like a very nice place to live. It looks more like a hostile and unwelcoming place to be. As far as people outside of those areas, their concerns, I think, kind of revolved around the wording and the language that was used. A lot of the language that was used was kind of a little bit shocking for people that lived in other parts of the country, and kind of almost, I guess, offending. And so the book initially really was not received very well to a degree. I mean, it was commercially successful, it was critically successful. However, it did create quite a stir and upset a lot of people initially. Another book that kind of created some controversy, not really in the United States, but more in European countries, was The Moon is Down. In this particular book, a lot of what went on could be likened to what went on with the Nazis occupying other countries in Europe and the things that happened with that. And this book created such a stir that during World War II, people who owned it in those countries could actually be shot for owning it. So you can see that John Steinbeck certainly was not one to back down from controversy. He's going to tell you his thoughts. He will deal with the consequences of it, but he certainly would not back down and be bullied into not expressing those thoughts. Okay, the questions that I have for my presentation, two different questions. The first one is, Grapes of Wrath inspired legislation to assist farm workers with being treated fairly. What other written works inspired changes in laws or attitude, and what impact did they have on society? I'm kind of interested to know if there's other written works either by well-known authors or maybe not so well-known authors that have created situations which created a big social change for us or created laws that help society as a whole. Okay, my second question is, both John Steinbeck and Upton Sinclair wrote works that detailed the plight of lower working class people. How do the struggles of lower working class people differ today from earlier times? How could society do a better job of protecting and assisting these people? And this is my last slide. This was the resources that I used, and I thank everyone very much for listening to my presentation. I hope it has been insightful, and I look forward to listening to all of yours. Thank you.